Thousands upon thousands of warriors marching clear across a continent. And they're all driven by this incredible mix of faith and pure ambition. For nearly 200 years, this was the world we lived in, as Europe and the Middle East were absolutely rocked by a series of brutal, sprawling conflicts we now call the Crusades. And that's really the big question here, isn't it? I mean, what could possibly motivate so many people? We're talking knights, soldiers, even regular folks, to just pack up, leave their homes, and set off on this incredibly dangerous journey to fight for a city thousands of kilometers away. Let's dig in and break it all down. All right, so first up, what even were the Crusades? Before we jump into the epic journeys and the battles, we really need to get a handle on what this was all about. And at its core, it was a massive collision of worlds, a clash over both faith and territory. So, putting it simply, the Crusades were a series of military campaigns that got the green light from the Catholic Church back in the Middle Ages. The main players here were Christian forces from Europe and the Muslim forces who controlled the Middle East. And these wars would flare up, die down, and flare up again for almost 2 centuries, completely reshaping the map of the world. And look, these weren't just random wars over some forgotten border. Not at all. They had a laser-like focus on one single, incredibly powerful objective, the city of Jerusalem. That was it. Control of this one holy city was the engine that fueled nearly 200 years of conflict. So why all the fuss over Jerusalem? Well, it was, and it still is, a sacred city to 3 of the world's biggest religions. Now, by this time, it had been under Muslim rule for over 400 years. But back in Europe, a really powerful idea started to catch on, that this holy land, as they saw it, should belong to Christians. And that belief, it was about to become a powerful, continent-spanning rallying cry. Okay, on to our next section, the call to arms. Having a widespread belief is one thing, but getting an entire continent ready for war, that's something else entirely. So how did this idea actually transform into one of the biggest military campaigns of the entire medieval era? So, the story of the very First Crusade doesn't actually begin with an attack. It starts with a call for help. The year is 1095, and the Byzantine Empire, which was a Christian empire to the east, was feeling seriously threatened by the advance of the Seljuk Turks. So, their emperor did something pretty extraordinary. He reached out to the west, all the way to the Pope in Rome, and asked for military aid. Now, this is where you can see how it all unfolded, almost like dominoes falling. Let's walk through it, step by step. It all starts with the emperor's request for some troops, but Pope Urban II, he saw a much, much bigger opportunity here. He gives this incredibly passionate speech at a meeting called the Council of Clermont, and he completely reframes the whole thing. This isn't just about helping an ally anymore. No, this is now a holy mission for all Christians to march east and take back Jerusalem itself. And the response was just staggering. Thousands of people answered the call. So what could possibly drive someone to sign up for this? Well, it was a really powerful cocktail of reasons. For the devout, the Pope offered something you just couldn't get anywhere else: complete forgiveness for every sin you'd ever committed, a total spiritual clean slate. But let's be real, it wasn't just about faith. For the knights and nobles, this was also a shot at earthly rewards. We're talking wealth, land, and a whole lot of glory. And so, with the armies gathered and their reasons set, the First Crusade kicked off. And its journey to Jerusalem would turn out to be long, incredibly difficult, and unbelievably violent. This timeline really gives you a sense of the scale of this thing. The march started in 1096, and it would take 3 long, grueling years. The armies made their way through Constantinople, fought their way across the Middle East, taking key cities along the way, until finally, in the year 1099, they were standing right outside the walls of Jerusalem. But the final capture of the city, well, it was a horrifyingly brutal affair. After a long, hard siege, the Crusader forces finally broke through the walls. The victory they had been fighting and dying for was secured with extreme violence. The historical sources tell us that thousands of the city's men, women, and children were killed in the massacre that followed. So what was the immediate result of all this? Well, from a European perspective, the First Crusade was a shocking success. They'd achieved their main goal. The victors went on to establish several new Christian territories in the region, which we now call the Crusader states. And the most important of these, of course, was the new Kingdom of Jerusalem. But here's the thing. Taking the city was one thing. Holding it, while completely surrounded by hostile powers, that was a whole different ballgame. The victory in 1099 wasn't the end of the story. Not even close. It was actually the beginning of almost 200 more years of war. And it leaves us with that one big lingering question. How long could this possibly last? When we think about the Crusades, we usually picture that first big charge into the Holy Land, right? But what about the end of the story? We're about to dive into the really dramatic final chapters of the Crusader era, a time full of legendary leaders, some shocking betrayals, and, well, a legacy that you can still feel today. And for a while, it really seemed like the European project in the Middle East was working. They set up several Crusader states, controlled key territories, and for decades they managed to hold on. It was this unique, kind of fascinating blend of Eastern and Western cultures. But as you can guess, that stability, it was about to be completely shattered. See, while the Crusaders were busy building their kingdoms, a new power was rising in the background. A single visionary leader was starting to pull together all these fractured groups in the region, and he had one single goal in mind: to push the Crusaders out for good. And this brings us to a really organized resistance that would directly challenge and, yeah, ultimately reverse everything the Crusaders had gained. And it all centered around one of the most famous names in all of medieval history. And that leader, of course, was Saladin. Now, to really get why he was so effective, you gotta see him as more than just a brilliant general. I mean, he was a master politician. He managed to unite rival Muslim territories under one banner, all by appealing to this common cause of defending Islam. And in doing so, he created an army that was powerful enough to take on the full might of the Crusader states. And his campaign? Oh, it was swift, and it was devastatingly effective. Once he had all that power consolidated, he just moved right against the Crusaders. The year you need to remember is 1187. It was pivotal. First, he just crushes the main Crusader army at the Battle of Hattin. And then, only a few months later, he does the unthinkable. He recaptures the city of Jerusalem. The news hit Europe like an absolute thunderclap. I mean, for Christians, Jerusalem was the center of the world. Losing it after they'd held it for almost a century, well, it was a massive spiritual and military crisis. A response wasn't just expected, it was absolutely demanded. And what a response it was. This wasn't just another small wave of knights showing up. No. This was the Third Crusade, probably better known as the King's Crusade. It was an all-out effort by the most powerful rulers in Christendom to go and take back the Holy City. I mean, just look at this lineup. You've got Richard the Lionheart of England, an absolute legendary warrior. You have Philip II of France and the incredible Frederick Barbarossa, the Holy Roman Emperor. This was not a minor expedition. This was the medieval version of a superpower summit deciding to go to war together. So the whole crusade pretty quickly becomes this legendary duel between its two most famous figures, Richard the Lionheart and Saladin. Richard wins several huge battles along the coast, really proving his military genius. But Saladin was every bit as brilliant, and he successfully defended the ultimate prize, Jerusalem itself. So this clash of titans, it basically ended in a strategic stalemate. In the end, neither side could get a total victory. Richard couldn't take the city, but Saladin couldn't completely drive the Crusaders out either. So they reached a compromise. A truce was signed, and it guaranteed that unarmed Christian pilgrims could travel safely to Jerusalem's holy sites. Now, that was a practical solution for sure, but for the Crusaders, it was a military failure. It wasn't what they came for. You know, after that huge spectacle of the King's Crusade, the entire crusading movement just kind of lost its way. It entered this period marked by, well, misadventure and a whole lot of decline. I just want you to look at this number for a second. 1204. It's a year that pretty much lives in infamy. It marks what is maybe the absolute lowest point in the entire history of the Crusades. So what happened? In 1204, the Fourth Crusade went disastrously off the rails. Instead of going to fight in the Holy Land, the crusading army, thanks to some shady politics and a lot of debt, turned its fury on the magnificent Christian city of Constantinople, the capital of the Byzantine Empire. They sacked it, and in doing so, they weakened the greatest Christian defense in the East for centuries. After a disaster like that, you can imagine the Crusader states were basically living on borrowed time. They weren't getting major reinforcements from a now pretty disillusioned Europe, and they were facing Muslim powers that were getting stronger and stronger. So their territories just began to shrink. One by one, their castles and their cities fell. And that brings us to this final, definitive date.
If you think of 1187 as the turning point, well, then 1291, that was the end of the line for the Crusader kingdoms. In 1291, the city of Acre, which was the last major Crusader stronghold left in the Holy Land, was finally captured. And with its fall, the dream of having a permanent Christian kingdom in the East was officially over. The whole era of these large-scale crusades to the Holy Land had come to a final, conclusive end. But of course, the story doesn't just end there. The Crusades left behind this incredibly complex and lasting legacy, and it fundamentally changed the relationship between the East and the West forever. And you can really see the two sides of that legacy here. On one hand, the Crusades opened up these massive new trade routes. Europeans got access to priceless knowledge, new ideas in math, more advanced medicine, new technologies all started flowing west. But on the other hand, they left behind centuries of religious bitterness and this legacy of violent conflict that would go on to shape global politics for generations to come. So if you try to see the Crusades as just a series of medieval wars over territory, you're really missing the bigger picture. It's not even close. There was something much, much more profound. It was this massive intersection of faith, of power, of culture, and yeah, of greed, all on a global scale. It pulled in everyone from kings to peasants, knights to scholars, and the consequences of it all completely reshaped the map of the known world. Which really just leaves us with one final question to think about. Are the Crusades just some dramatic but distant chapter in a history book? Or, when you look at the conflicts, the cultural dialogues, and the political tensions between East and West today, are we still, in some way, living in the world that the Crusades created?